Hello students, we're going to finish up the book in this video, so it might be a tad bit long, so sorry if that's a problem, but we're going to finish it up, okay? So here we go, chapter 27, Mike Teavee is sent by television. Mike Teavee was even more excited than Grandpa Joe at seeing a bar of chocolate being sent by television. But Mr. Wonka, he shouted, can you send other things through the air in the same way? Oh, absolutely, yes, I could probably send just about anything, but could you send people? Could you send a real live person from one place to another in the same way? A person? Cried Mr. Wonka. Are you off your rocker? But could it be done? Well, good heavens, child, I really don't know. I suppose it could. I wouldn't want to risk it, though. Might have some very nasty results. But Mike Teavee was already off and running. The moment he heard Mr. Wonka say, I'm pretty sure I could, he turned away and started running as fast as he could towards the other end of the room where the great camera was standing. Look at me, he shouted. I'm going to be the first person in the world to be sent by television. No, don't do that, cried Mr. Wonka. Mike, screamed Mrs. Teavee. Stop, come back. You'll be turned into a million tiny pieces. But there was no stopping Mike Teavee now. The crazy boy rushed on. When he reached the enormous camera, he jumped straight for the switch, scattering Oompa Loompas right and left as he went. See you later, alligator, he shouted, and he pulled down the switch, and as he did so, he leaped out into the full glare of the mighty lens. There was a blinding flash, and then there was silence. Then Mrs. Teavee ran forward. She stopped in the middle of the room and stood there, staring at the place where her son had been. And then she screamed, He's gone! He's gone! Mr. Wonka hurried forward and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. We shall have to hope for the best at this point, ma'am, he said. We must hope that your little boy will come out unharmed at the other end. Mike, where are you? Said Mrs. Teavee. I'll tell you where he is, said Mr. Teavee. He's whizzing about over our heads in a million tiny pieces. Oh, don't say that, wailed Mrs. Teavee. We must watch the television set, said Mr. Wonka. He may come through any moment. Mr. and Mrs. Teavee, Grandpa Joe, little Charlie, and Mr. Wonka all gathered around the television screen. It was quite blank. Sure is taking him a long time to get here, said Mr. Teavee. Oh dear, I do hope no part of him gets left behind. What on earth do you mean? Said Mrs. Teavee sharply. I don't mean to alarm you further, but it does sometimes happen that only about half the little pieces find their ways into the television set. Happened last week. I don't know why, but the result was we only had half a bar of chocolate come through. You mean only a half of Mike is coming back? Well, let's hope it's the top half, said Mr. Teavee. Hold everything, said Mr. Wonka. Watch the screen. Something's happening. The screen had suddenly begun to flicker. Some wavy lines appeared. Mr. Wonka adjusted one of the knobs, and the lines went away, and very slowly the screen began to get brighter. Here he comes, said Mr. Wonka. Whew, yes, that's him all right. Is he all in one piece? Yelled Mrs. Teavee. I'm not sure yet, said Mr. Wonka. It's too early to tell. Faintly at first, a picture of Mike Teavee appeared on the screen. He was standing up and waving at the audience and grinning from ear to ear. But he's so little, said Mr. Teavee. Mike, are you all right? Is he not going to get any bigger? Shouted Mr. Teavee. Talk to me, Mike. Say something. Tell me you're all right, cried Mrs. Teavee. A tiny little voice, no louder than the squeaking of a mouse, came out of the television set. Hi, Mom, it said. Hi, Pop. Look at me. I'm the first person ever to be sent by television. Grab him quick, ordered Mr. Wonka. Mrs. Teavee shot out a hand and picked the tiny figure of Mike Teavee out of the screen. Oh, hooray, said Mr. Wonka. He's all in one piece. He's completely unharmed. You call that unharmed? Snapped Mrs. Teavee, peering at the little speck of a boy who was now running to and fro across the palm of her hand. He was certainly not more than an inch tall. He shrunk, said Mr. Teavee. Of course he shrunk, said Mr. Wonka. What did you expect? Oh, this is terrible, said Mrs. Teavee. What are we going to do? Well, we can't send him back to school like this. He'll get stepped on, said Mr. Teavee. You won't be able to do anything, cried Mrs. Teavee. Oh, yes, I will, squeaked the tiny voice of Mike Teavee. I'll still be able to watch television. Never again, shouted Mr. Teavee. I'm throwing the television set right out the window the moment we get home. I've had enough of television. When Mike heard this, he flew into a terrible tantrum. He started jumping up and down on the palm of his mother's hand, screaming and yelling, "I want to watch television! I want to watch television!" "Here, give him to me," said Mr. Teavee, and he took the tiny boy and shoved him into the breast pocket of his jacket and stuffed a handkerchief on top. Squeals and yells came from inside the pocket, and the pocket shook as the furious little prisoner fought to get out. "Oh, Mr. Wonka," wailed Mrs. Teavee, "how can we make him grow?" "Well, that's going to be a bit tricky. Small boys are extremely springy and elastic, though. What we'll do, we'll put him in a special machine I have for testing the stretchiness of chewing gum. Maybe that'll bring him back to what he was." "Oh, please, let's do something." "How far do you think he'll stretch?" asked Mr. Teavee. "Maybe miles," said Mr. Wonka. "Who knows? But he's going to be awfully thin. Everything gets thinner when you stretch it." "You mean like chewing gum?" asked Mr. Teavee. "Exactly." "How thin will he be?" asked Mrs. Teavee anxiously. "I haven't the foggiest idea," said Mr. Wonka. "And it doesn't really matter anyway, because we'll soon fatten him up again. All we'll have to do is give him a triple overdose of my wonderful super vitamin candy, and he will be all right. Especially if I give him vitamin Wonka." "What will vitamin Wonka do to him?" asked Mr. Teavee anxiously. "It'll make his toes grow out until they're as long as his fingers." "Oh no," said Mrs. Teavee. "Oh, I'm just kidding. It's not seriously going to do that," said Mr. Wonka. "Now, no arguments, please," said Mr. Wonka. He turned away and clicked his fingers 3 times in the air, and Oompa Loompa appeared immediately and stood beside him. "Follow these orders," said Mr. Wonka, handing the Oompa Loompa a piece of paper on which he had written full instructions. "You'll find the boy in his father's pocket. Off you go. Goodbye, Mr. Teavee. Goodbye, Mrs. Teavee. Please don't look so worried. They all come out in the wash, you know. Every last one of them."